Hello and welcome to Uzbekistan's Economic Forum 2021, where we are joined by Vinayak Nagaraj, Senior Country Economist for Uzbekistan at the World Bank. Thank you for joining us. Hello.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So first of all, how do you reflect on the past 5 years since the country announced its intention to open up its economy?
So one of the things, I've been here now, this is my 4th year in Uzbekistan, so for about 4 of those 5 years I've had the privilege of working here. And I have to say it's like night and day. When we first got here, even that had been about a year after the reforms had started. But there were numerous challenges in the system. The foreign exchange reforms had just taken effect. The tax system was still in need of improvement. Some of the stories that I often like to tell people who are new to the country, in 2016, something like half of the foreign exchange in the country was being traded in informal markets, in bazaars, in commodity exchanges, right? 50%, that's the entire economy. Half of this economy was relying on informal, parallel, illegal markets for foreign exchange. And then these reforms happened, out of nowhere, in a surprising kind of way, unexpectedly, and within weeks, half of the economy's foreign exchange volumes moves from these illegal parallel markets straight into the formal banking system, and suddenly everything has become formalized and people are able to get foreign exchange when they want to. The tax system has changed in incredible ways. You used to, if I were hiring, let's say you were hiring me, and you needed to pay my wages in the formal system and to pay taxes. So for every 100 soms or $1 or whatever it is you want to use as a reference of my wage, you'd have to pay the same amount in taxation and labor contributions. So when you wanted to hire me for $1, you'd be paying $2. And that kind of a system was not well designed to allow private sector to grow. If you had more than 99 people in a company, you had a completely different tax system that was much more onerous, much higher rates of taxation and contributions, which incentivized companies to stay small. And so what you had was lots and lots of really small companies unable and unwilling to actually grow into big companies that hire people. And so all of that has changed in recent years. And I think the 6 or 8 months after the tax reforms happened, something like more than 1 million new taxpayers were registered into the system. People who were informally employed, under the table in contracts. Suddenly, there were no longer any incentives for businesses not to pay wages and allow these people access to the pension system. And I could go on. There are these stories, both in terms of the economy, in terms of the way regulation and businesses have changed, the way in which the rules and regulations apply to small and big businesses, making the system fairer, allowing more competition, price liberalization. In the Soviet Union, one of the most sacred prices was always the price of bread, because bread is so integral to the diet. And one of the boldest reforms that have happened here in recent years was the liberalization of bread prices. And it's something that many other countries chose to do much, much later. But in Uzbekistan, they realized that this was an important and integral part of the agricultural reform process. And if they didn't privatize or allow the liberalization of these prices, it would not work to actually allow the agriculture sector, which hires so many people and so many poor people, to move forward. Another aspect of these reforms for me, it's the economic reforms are very impressive, but really what's been truly remarkable, I think, in Uzbekistan's context is the social reforms. The way in which the state interacts with the citizen, the social contract, the rules and regulations of enforcement, the degree to which the government is kind of in your business, in your way sometimes. And all of that has changed. It's been a remarkable kind of experience here, even in the time that I have been here, because I had come after many of those changes had happened. They started with the complete, with the abolition of forced labor and child labor, which, continues to be something that, the government is making a lot of progress with. The cotton sector reforms have helped with that. But it's also the daily lives of people. You used to have very, very strict restrictions on moving from region to region. You needed complex permissions to be able to relocate. If you were coming from rural areas and you wanted to live in the city, you faced a lot of challenges. And so it encouraged people to not move to cities, right? And not seek prosperity. And that encouraged, and I could go on, but there's a lot of, there are a lot of these types of things that make it look like, it's really night and day.
So a lot has been achieved. Do you think that somewhat it's helped the economy weather global shocks like the pandemic, for instance?
Absolutely, right? So, Uzbekistan is one of the few countries in the world, and I think one of the only select number of countries in the Europe and Central Asia region for us at the World Bank where they had positive growth. And when we look and unpack, right, if you start to open up the leaves to understand where the growth came from, it came from sectors that were actually being liberalized by the reforms. The tremendous performance in 2019 of horticulture, of tourism services, all of these areas actually allowed the economy to become more productive, to unleash this productivity that actually allowed Uzbekistan to weather the storm. They were hit, this country was hit. It's not a country that's used to growing at 1% a year. But compared to many of the countries that were growing at negative, 6% or 7% a year, it was truly remarkable to see Uzbekistan weathering that storm. So absolutely and undoubtedly, this is a country that was able, thanks in large part to these reforms, to actually manage the COVID crisis really well.
The country is entering a new phase of its development with the announcement of a raft of reforms. Can you go through the most important ones and how they will help deliver this second round of changes to liberalize the economy?
When I think a little bit about the way the reforms have worked over the last 5 years, one of the things that I think strikes us at the bank, when we look across the reform transitional experiences of other countries, Uzbekistan is a late starter to the reforms. And so they're actually in a very lucky position, right? You can look across and cherry pick the reform stories that you look at and say, okay, we want our reforms to be that fairy tale. We don't want it to be that tragedy. And there's a whole raft of fairy tales and tragedies to learn from. And when we look at what Uzbekistan has done over the last 5 years, more or less, it has followed a good system of sequential reforms, looking at price liberalization first, not rushing into privatization, which other countries did rush into and then did not have the frameworks, the legal regime, the regulations to actually allow competition to build. None of that was there. And so in some ways, Uzbekistan has made a fast start in places that it should have moved quickly. And it has not moved as quickly in other areas such as privatization, the reduction of the role of the state. The state contributes 50%, continues to contribute about 50% of this economy. That's a lot, and it should not be that way, right? To allow the private sector to grow is a way to create jobs. And jobs were the reason this whole reform process started. There were 600,000 people looking for jobs every year before 2017. Maybe 200,000 of those people were able to find jobs, leaving large gaps of opportunity for people. Many of them women, disabled people, youth, people who could not, who were excluded. Correcting that is still something that needs to happen. It hasn't yet happened. The gap has shrunk, but unemployment is still there, and it's 10%. It hasn't recovered to pre-COVID levels. And so, the challenge now is how do you transition? It's a dance. You're in a dance, you're in a ballroom. How do you get this dance where you transfer the momentum of these reforms, of growth, of job creation from a state that has been so used to doing it for 30 years to a private sector that's productive and eager to take over, but needs that to happen in a way where it's orderly, because it can be disorderly, and what we have seen happening in other transitional experiences is that can go wrong. And so that's the challenge for the next 5 years. How do you execute an orderly transition from the state through fast but meaningful privatization, a reshaping of the private sector and continuing to remove the constraints? They can't yet access land, energy reliably, finance, where the banking system is still very heavily dominated by the state. Firms need inputs to grow. They need the land, they need the people. These investments are really what the state needs to start focusing on, liberalizing those areas, allowing this reshaping of the state. The state used to be a producer, but the state should not be a producer in the future. It needs to be an enabler of the market. The other thing that I think really is important over the next few years is putting people first. Citizens, investing in social outcomes, reversing some of the declines that have happened in human capital. Tertiary enrollment at independence in the just at the point of the Soviet handover was 16%, which was itself low. It came down to 9% before 2016. That's shockingly low and one of the lowest in the world. And that's been, slowly is being reversed. They're back to the 12 and 13%, but it needs to be much higher. Firms can't find the people that they need today. Putting people first is one easy way of allowing the job creation and the opportunities to come. And finally, one of the downsides of where Uzbekistan is today is that the state is so dominant in the economy, but that's going to change. But it's also an opportunity. When 50% of the economy is still under state control, and so much modernization needs to happen in this economy, why not build tomorrow's economy? Why modernize to build today's economy? And that's where the environment comes in and sustainability comes in. Uzbekistan is reforming in an era of global change. Policy change, mindsets, the global markets, preferences are changing. this is an opportunity to invest in a greener economy, in a more resource efficient economy, because water is going to be more scarce, minerals are going to be more scarce. Today is the time to make that change happen. So I really think focusing on these areas of the private sector, a state transformation, thinking about putting people first and the environment are my picks for the next 5 years.
And where do you think the country has a role to play on the regional and global scale?
So this is a loaded question, right? Because it's something that, it's another aspect, I mean, in some ways, that I wouldn't say is directly the economics of today, but is the, likely to influence the economics of the future of this region, has been Uzbekistan's regional transformation. From being relatively more isolated in the region and kind of, not particularly having the most cordial kind of relations, to putting the region really at the heart of its thinking and transformation process. And that's been a remarkable change. And, as an economist, I can only see a market here. I see a market of 33 million people that Uzbekistan can develop, or a market of more than 60 million people in this region that Uzbekistan can start to embrace. And I think it's doing the latter, right? And so from a regional perspective, it's eminently sensible for a large country, for the anchor in many perspectives, because of the number of people, that this could become a way to expand and allow the region to also move forward and take it forward, right, as Uzbekistan's transition moves ahead. Thinking about the rest of the world, I think for a long time, Uzbekistan's trade and kind of prosperity has depended on traditional historical partners. But again, I mean, this is another story that I like to tell people. Uzbekistan is living in an era where something like a third of the global population is next door through China, India, Pakistan, that's growing. And it's got 1/3 of global trade volumes that are happening in Europe. That's not actually that far away. So yes, it's a double landlocked country. And yes, being landlocked is a punishment for countries like Uzbekistan that are seeking greater prosperity. But there's a lot of value around it. So, I really believe that Uzbekistan's brand needs to be a global brand. It needs to be a global value proposition. If you can convince Koreans and Japanese to eat Uzbekistan's cherries, which they have convinced and they love them, this is a whole world, that is their oyster to trade with, because they make good things and they have this potential to actually export high quality value to the world.
Finally, the fact that they are organizing the very first economic forum of its kind for the country, what does it say about the momentum for change in Uzbekistan?
I think that I think this conference is it's a well-timed event, right? Because it's 5 years. The development strategy from 2017 to 21 under President Mirziyoyev's leadership is coming to an end. We're waiting to hear what the next strategy is going to look like. We're starting to get some of that from the announcements that are coming through. It's a really good time to take stock, right? And there's so much to celebrate. And I think sometimes when you work really hard for 5 years, I think you deserve a pat on the back. You deserve a celebration. You deserve to take stock of what has been done. And I think we should be doing that. And I think the conference is a really good time to do that. And given the kind of people that are coming here, a lot of people from around the world are actually, a remarkable number of people who are willing to actually take the time to travel in person during a very, very difficult time for global travel. They are here. And I think that itself is an endorsement. It's a signal of what people see here, the promise, the future. And that is a good example, right, of what people are rooting for. There's an immense number of people around the world, international stakeholders, that are rooting for Uzbekistan's success. But they're also a really good group of people to sit down and take stock of what needs to happen next. These are some of my ideas about what the next 5 years are, but I really do think that we want to sit and listen to what other people have to say. And I think bringing people together to actually share these experiences is something we want to do. So I think, combined, I think this just presents a great time to do that.
How unique is what Uzbekistan is aiming for at the moment in terms of this raft of reforms we've talked about?
We talk about this quite a lot at the bank when we think about it, because the bank has been involved in so many transitions. And I really can't, it's very difficult to actually find a parallel to what happened here in 2016, 17. Most countries actually do this kind of transformation from a position of crisis or weakness. They run out of international reserves, they're in a trade crisis, they have a payments crisis, or, there's upheaval, there's a lot of resentment, there's uprising, there's discontent. In some ways, Uzbekistan started its transformation from a position of strength. It started from a position where I don't think anybody really expected it, so it had the element of surprise. It had 60% or more in terms of percentage of GDP in international reserves. It had fiscal discipline, and very few countries have kind of orchestrated the type of transformation that Uzbekistan is doing from that position of financial strength. And why is that important? It means that when you liberalize the price of bread, you don't have to allow poor people to pay the price for that. You can buffer that. And one of the nicest things that Uzbekistan has been able to do in this reform is use those buffers, use its position of strength, and use its, the fact that it has time on its side and there isn't a rush to actually get to an outcome because this is from a position of choice, to be able to actually execute an orderly transformation where, we've seen in other countries, in other transitional experiences, poor people get really badly hurt. And here, they've managed to buffer those costs in ways that only Uzbekistan, in some ways could have done with the reserves and the financial power that it had. Every major large structural transformation that it has effected, largely price liberalizations, electricity price increases, have come with social mitigation measures, which have kind of led to historic increases in the number of people that get allowances and benefits. So that's really where this dance of the economic and social reforms have moved so well together. It could have only happened in some ways because Uzbekistan chose that time and place to make it happen.
I have to ask you, as an economist, being here at this time in Uzbekistan's history, does it feel like being in a candy shop?
So one of the stories that I like to tell again here, I seem to like a lot of stories to tell. I'm new to the World Bank and I was assigned here directly to the field. And, I'm in South Indian and I have a little shrine in my house. And there's a little photograph of the person that I think did not take up this job. They were given the job offer, an internal candidate. And it's like winning the lottery to be here. And I can only say that I thank the people who did not choose to move here, that gave me the opportunity to come in from outside, because for me, this has been the assignment of a lifetime, to be in an environment where change is happening on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. You can feel it happening and you can see the impact. In an environment where the bank is an important advisor that's being listened to, where we have this power and therefore the responsibility to provide really good advice. And we have a government that's very, very keen to make change happen. It's the holy trinity of any country economist, the bank, right? And so for me, it's like, there's going to be a lot of withdrawal symptoms when my assignment comes to an end.
What could the future of Uzbekistan look like?
One thing that we think about this question, where is Uzbekistan's future? What could it look like? This is a country that's, rich in its natural endowments. But it's also lucky, unlike, say, some of its neighbors that have these natural endowments, it's also rich in human capital. It's an illustrious history of human capital. Markets, even if markets were temporarily suspended during the Soviet era and about 30 years after that, their blood, the DNA of Uzbekistan is just absolutely flush with this idea of trading with the world, of seeking prosperity, of hard work. And this comes from the Silk Road, culture that existed here. And really what my hope for Uzbekistan, I think, thinking ahead, this is maybe more a personal vision than necessarily a professional one, is really to see that mercantilism come back. It's to see, the enterprise of people being unlocked. It's to allow people to come back, their economic freedoms fully restored, and for them to actually go back to the, very important role that they used to play, and that they still probably need to play given where Uzbekistan sits in the world. And for me, the future is that it's the prosperity of this country being built once again on markets, on opportunities, on trade, and luckily now with modernization and history on our side, the natural, sustainable exploitation of these wonderful natural resources that Uzbekistan has.
Generally, people don't know much about Uzbekistan, but what could it stand for? I mean, what does brand Uzbekistan mean?
I mean, this is kind of sad. It's sad that they don't know what it was because, hundreds of years ago, everybody knew what Uzbekistan was. It was it was basically the hub of trade and commerce. And so if you ask me, what is the brand of Uzbekistan? I think they've got to bring that back. They've got to be this purveyor of fine goods and services to the world, right? In the 13th century, people were writing chapters on the quality of Uzbek melons. Uzbekistan's melons should be in every fine supermarket of the world. The finest, most discerning cherry consumers in East Asia should be eating Uzbekistan's cherries because they are so good. And I think when I think about what Uzbekistan actually has to offer the world, it is this: fine tourism services, fine produce, fine horticulture. Everything that Uzbekistan seems to put its mind to, it can do a really good job of and produce world-beating quality. And so for me, I think that's how Uzbekistan should be stamping itself. Not just a supplier to some supermarkets close by, but targeting the Harrods of the world and targeting, these Fortnum and Masons, where really, really fine produce from this country can be seen and is demanded and is, discernibly the choice of people. That's my idea, Uzbekistan, the fine purveyor of goods and services to the world.
Vinayak Nagaraj, thank you very much.
Thanks, it's been great being here, and it's always a nice opportunity to kind of let my energy out on all these things that I think are happening here on the ground. So thanks for having me.